we're going to start in Big Ten country this year. And speaking of transfers, man, the first two on the board are hitting that right there. Experienced starters going from a sitting Power 5 or Power 4 job to try to take their team to the next level and try to eclipse a plateau that their team has hit over the last couple of years. We're going to start out west. Of course, the 18-team Big Ten now includes Oregon and their new starting quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. Garrett, they lost maybe the most experienced college football quarterback ever in Bo Nix. So they just go out and replace him with another guy that has 5 years of experience combined at UCF and Oklahoma. He's the next Bo Nix, man. Like, I don't know what to say. He already has 125 touchdowns to his name over his career, 15,000 yards. Again, 5 seasons where he's gotten game experience dating all the way back to 2019. And he even had more success prior to arriving in Eugene than Bo Nix did at Auburn. When we saw the revelation that Bo Nix saw when he got into that offense up in Oregon. My only question with Dylan Gabriel, and I'll try to have a question for each of these guys for all of our discussion here to kind of frame the conversation. How is he going to respond to the uptick in competition? Because we saw him at UCF. They were in the American at that time. We saw him for 2 years at Oklahoma. He balled out. He put up gaudy numbers, but we know the Big 12 is not necessarily known for their defenses. It's going to be an uptick in competition in the Big Ten, and I'm really excited to see how he handles that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big thing is he's getting a chance to prove himself at the very top, right? Oregon making the move to the Big Ten, you're going to have to play some good teams. And at the end of the year, if you're in the Big Ten championship game, like a lot of Oregon people want, is it going to be Michigan? Is it going to be Ohio State? Is it going to be Penn State? Is it going to be, Wisconsin? Like who's going to be there? Whoever it is going to have a much better defense than anybody you played the last couple of years, maybe except for Texas last year. Texas had a pretty good defense last year. But outside of that, these are all going to be better defenses than what you faced recently. So, I think for Gabriel, the big thing for him to me is, last year, Bo Nix did such a good job not turning the football over, making really good decisions with the football, and just letting his playmakers do their things. The playmakers aren't quite there, or at least if they are there, they're maybe less experienced. I do think that there's plenty of talent up there, and I think that they're going to be just fine. Obviously, we did a breakout candidate over the running back spot, and how I think that Oregon's going to be just fine at running back, and they got Evan Stewart up there. So, there's going to be some talented wide receivers and running backs to work in the offense with. But Dylan Gabriel has to find a way to get them the football and not try to force things if they're running a tough spots, right? If they're playing in a cold environment and it's, one of those grueling Big Ten days, or it's, maybe a little bit of wind and everything else going on. How do you make the offense go? Now, I do think he has some advantages, whereas, with Bo Nix not necessarily not an athlete. He had good legs, but Dylan Gabriel's the much better runner of those two quarterbacks. I think Gabriel's going to be able to get them out of some tough spots, and that's going to be good. The question for me, though, is can he be as effective with his arm? Can he be as effective getting the ball to his playmakers and not turning the ball over in big spots? Not necessarily a concern, but looking at his last couple of years at Oklahoma, he went 25 touchdowns, 6 picks, and 30 touchdowns, 6 picks. That's pretty good. The problem is with Bo Nix, I think he threw like 3 picks all year. So a little bit of a tick down. I know we're probably, picking a little bit here. Dylan Gabriel's a fantastic quarterback. There's a reason he's our number 1 in the Big Ten. And really, when it gets down to it, you have to nitpick. This is a fantastic quarterback the Ducks have, and it should put them in position to compete at the top of the Big Ten and maybe find their way into one of those top 4 seeds, get that bye week for the playoff.
Yeah, and I think, Will Stein, his offense is going to be tailor-made to what Dylan Gabriel does best, right? It was for Bo Nix a lot of times. This was a knock on Bo Nix when he got to the NFL draft process. It's one read. It's a quick get it out. It's utilizing his legs. It's doing what Dylan Gabriel has shown he can do for the course of his entire long college career at this point. So I think he's going to fit like a glove in that offense, and he's going to keep it going from where it left off last year. And that's why he's number 1 for me. I think the fit plus his skill set is going to lead to a lot of happy fans up there in the Pacific Northwest. Let's go to a fan base that was not happy with their quarterback play last year, and that's the Ohio State Buckeyes. Checking in at number 2 on our list is another transfer, Will Howard. Again, very experienced quarterback, has seen a lot of time under center at Kansas State, and he had a stellar tenure once he took over as a starter at Kansas State. I take you back to 2022. He's inserted in the starting lineup midway through the year, and Kansas State did not look back after that. I think they beat Oklahoma State like 49-0 or something in his first start, something ridiculous like that. And Kansas State just didn't look back all the way en route to a Big 12 championship where they knocked off TCU right before that playoff game for TCU. So the situation here is kind of a match made in heaven because Kansas State had an experienced quarterback in Will Howard, but they also had a 5-star freshman that they wanted to appease in Avery Johnson. More on him on Thursday's show. Little tease for you. But Kansas State was ready for the Avery Johnson era, and Ohio State had a massive need because Kyle McCord was not going to get it done in Columbus, or so they believe. So this is a match made in heaven, but Will Howard, my question for him is, how is he going to handle the spotlight and the scrutiny of Columbus? Because we'll talk about Kyle McCord a little bit in our ACC segment. Numbers wise, he was not a bad quarterback for Ohio State, but he was not Justin Fields. He was not what they had gotten used to up there in Columbus. So can Will Howard handle that spotlight and scrutiny? That's going to be a massive storyline to follow as the Buckeyes try to buck the trend of the last few years.
Yeah, and I think you're, keying in on something that's pretty massive here. This might be one of the more interesting cases of backup infatuation that I've ever seen with Ohio State here, where, you have, McCord last year who was fine. He was perfectly fine. There wasn't really anything wrong with his game.
Not up to the
He just
standard.
wasn't dynamic. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of my big thing is, you have this quarterback who, he's throwing to one of the most talented receiving cores out there. You have him with, extremely talented running backs, and Henderson was plenty fine. And, anybody who spelled him for a second, or I think he might have had an injury thing during the year and then came back. The backups were fine. They have plenty fine playmakers. I mean, Ohio State has one of the most talented rosters in the whole country. They got great players at every position, and McCord couldn't find a way to get it done. But really, what I feel like most people are judging him on is the fact that, yeah, he just didn't beat Michigan, right? Like that's kind of what it's become at Ohio State recently is, yeah, we don't care if you beat Penn State. We don't care if you can run the table. We don't care if you can do any of that stuff. We have to find a way to get over the Michigan hump. And Michigan just got finished with one of the more dominant, kind of runs of football we've seen in a while. And so, this is a chance. Like, if you gave McCord the reins this year, they probably find their way to a Big Ten championship just based on how much Michigan's losing. And I know that there's some speculation about their quarterback spot. Spoiler, none of their quarterbacks make our list. So that's something to, maybe just go ahead and say, like, yeah, Alex Orji, we appreciate you. Jack Tuttle, cool. But,
you're not on the Tuttle bandwagon? Not on the Tuttle bandwagon?
But Will Howard. So, no, the thing I think is interesting here is Will Howard suffered from backup infatuation because there was a 5-star on the bench ready to go, and he had some wheels and he could kind of run a little bit more. And Will Howard is a pocket passing quarterback. That is what he is. He can sling it all over the field. And that was perfectly fine when they had playmakers and when Deuce Vaughn was there and everything else. And it wasn't quite good enough, or maybe it should have been good enough. But then again, the Kansas State fans, backup infatuation. So we're kind of getting this interesting dichotomy of a fan base that just kicked a guy because they couldn't stand that he was there and anybody else has to be better. And they're bringing in a guy who just left the same exact situation. And so to me, the spotlight on Will Howard has to be just, I mean, the bright as the sun. Get your eclipse glasses out. Like he's got to make sure he's being safe and protecting his eyes because that spotlight's going to be bright. And so I think he has all the talent that he needs to succeed at Ohio State. I think he's probably one of the better pickups in the transfer portal for any team at any position because I think he does a lot of things really, really well. That's going to work great with Ohio State and what they want to do, throwing the ball around the yard and handing it off and all that. But man, like I really wonder how he handles the pressure of that first bad game, right? Or if it's, he's against Nebraska and it's a little too close, right? And it's, we beat Nebraska, but we only beat them by 3. And when we looked across the field, Rayola kind of outshined you. Like, is it going to be the same situation again where the fans are just going to call for the next guy? If it is that going to give them kind of flashbacks to last year at Kansas State? There's a lot of, kind of mental dynamics here that are going to test Will Howard. There's no question about his ability on the field. I don't think anybody can question he can make all the throws on the field and do a great job. To me, it's about what happens between the ears. Can he get it done? Can he get it done in the biggest spots? And then for every Ohio State fan, the big question, can he beat Michigan? That's got to be what he does this year. That's your entire measure of success right now at Ohio State is, can you beat Michigan? Can you get us back into the Big Ten championship game? Can you go put that, hardware there, and can we get back into the playoff?
I'm really glad you ended with that because that was going to be my next point. It's going to come down to, did he beat Michigan? Yes, successful quarterback. Did he not? No, not successful quarterbacks. And that's not fair to the kid, right? Because he could
Right.
go 11-1 and they could make a run in the college football playoff and it could be really successful. But that's where Ohio State is at after 3 years of losing that game. It's all going to come down to that last Saturday in November. So listen, Will Howard, do I think he's an upgrade from Kyle McCord? Yes, I do. I think that
Yeah.
as a college quarterback and at this point in their careers, Will Howard is better than Kyle McCord. Will he be more successful than Kyle McCord? That remains to be seen. I don't think his ceiling, I don't think it's outrageous to say that his ceiling is not as high as CJ Stroud or Justin Fields when they were in Columbus, right? So will it still be something lacking for that fan base? It does all come down to if they beat Michigan. Kyle McCord would still be in Columbus if he led a game-winning drive in the Big House last year. You cannot convince me otherwise. So
if he doesn't, if their offensive line doesn't get beat and allow a free runner, and then he doesn't decide to chuck up that ball that gets picked, there's a good chance to go down, kick a field goal, or even score a touchdown, win that game. Like that, I don't think we understand like how. And this is the thing that I don't.
if they do
And
that,
maybe
they
it's
probably win a natty, right? Like, because I don't think any
no, there's
like
a
they
really
won't.
good chance that Ohio State, with their team that they had, I know that they didn't show up for the Missouri game and the bowl game, but like half their team was sitting out, and like Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't play that game. So like if they brought their whole team, I don't doubt that they're probably beating Bama if they got paired up in the same way that Michigan did. They're probably beating Bama in the Rose Bowl, and yeah, they're probably beating Washington in the national championship game. Like they're probably running the exact same thing Michigan did. I think they were probably the two best teams, maybe 1A, 1B. And, unfortunately for them, they just came up like that short in that game. And the biggest game of the year in all of college football tends to just end up being the game. And the thing that I want to, and maybe if there's Ohio State fans that want to comment on this, they can, but I don't understand how and yes, the quarterback gets all the blame, but why does he get all the blame in that situation? Like he's trying to lead a drive, he's trying to get the ball out, but he gets beat and he gets pressure in his face. Like, yes, should you try to roll out? Yeah. Can you try to just throw the ball away? Yes. Well, like you're in a big time spot. You're just trying to get the ball to your playmakers. And it's also one play, whereas like they were in that game the entire way. They were right there with Michigan the entire way. And it's not because McCord was terrible. It's because McCord actually played pretty dang good up until that last drive where he made a mistake. And so, I mean, maybe if Ohio State fans want to comment, like, why was the scrutiny so much on this guy? Like, he had a pretty good season. He wasn't dynamic. He wasn't, one of these guys that's gone off to the NFL. He wasn't. He wasn't Stroud, but he was just fine. And maybe just fine ain't good enough at Ohio State, and maybe it's not going to be good enough with Will Howard if he's just fine, right? If he
It
gets
won't.
him to the
It
national
won't.
championship game and falls short, I mean, we saw what Fields did that, so it's the same situation.
Well, Ohio State as a program has earned the right to ask for more than just fine at the quarterback
Sure.
position and other positions, and that's going to chew some kids up and eat them alive, right? Like it's
Sure.
going to be really frustrating to have kids like Kyle McCord. I think Syracuse is really happy they have them on this
Oh,
team,
yeah.
and he's probably going to be a star for Syracuse this year, but just wouldn't cut it. And so Will Howard, I do think he's going to be more dynamic with his legs. That's another X factor that we definitely haven't brought up yet, more so than Kyle McCord. He can move around in that pocket.
Mhm.
He can make plays with his legs. He had a lot of design runs in that Colin Klein offense at Kansas
Mhm.
State. So I'm excited to see it on the field. I think it's going to be a definite upgrade. And at the worst, he'll keep the offense moving down the field. And really, with the talent that they have, that's all that you really need. Let's go on to number 3. And this might be a controversial pick when you look at the results on the field. And a lot of people love to hate on this kid for his first year as a starter. I just want to remind people he's had one full season as a starter, and that's Drew Aller at Penn State. Yes, he is the third best quarterback in the Big Ten as we sit here in June of the year of our Lord 2024. Because, Garrett, for the much maligned season that he had last year, his slash line was 2,631 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. I
It's
know
pretty
he
good.
did. I know that the offense struggled against Ohio State and Michigan. I'd like you to point me to the offenses that didn't struggle against Ohio State and Michigan this year, because those were two of the most elite defenses in the country. He was playing Michigan on the road, right? Who did they have at home? Michigan, or was it flipped last year?
Yeah, Michigan was at home, Ohio State was on the road.
So they're playing at the Horseshoe. They're playing a Michigan defense that travels anywhere and was maybe one of the best defenses of modern college football. Yeah, the first year starter is going to struggle against those two guys. And guess what? The biggest jump typically in players happens from year 1 of as a starter to year 2. You see flashes. I saw enough flashes in Drew Aller last year. Mitch did not, and he's not here to defend and give the contrarian take. But I saw enough flashes in Drew Aller last year to be cautiously optimistic about this year that he could break out and make a big jump. I don't think there's any other quarterback in the Big Ten other than him that we haven't already mentioned that could finish number 1. Drew Aller is the last one on this list that could finish number 1 to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a decent chance he could finish number 1. He has to make a heck of a jump, because
Yeah,
we're also
it
talking
would
about him
have to
being
be like
better than Dylan
things
Gabriel,
have
so
to go right. Things have to go right for that to happen. But he's
yeah.
the last one
But
that I can
I
paint.
also wanna give him a little bit of credit here. They lost to Ohio State by 8 and Michigan by 9. So it's not like they got blown out of the waters by teams that were just massively superior to them. And I think with a worse roster and probably, if we're being honest, worse playmakers at the wide receiver position than either of those teams are really working with. And man, maybe Michigan's a little bit where you could go back and forth on that one. I think Michigan had some good playmakers, but neither here nor there. I mean, they won the Natty. But I think Penn State, they're kind of in a weird spot right now where Drew Aller could make the jump and still not get the help that he needs. They lost some pieces this offseason, so it's kind of a like, who is he throwing to? He kind of has the biggest weight on his shoulders of maybe any player in college football right now, because he's got the expectations that Penn State has, and probably rightfully should have. They should expect to compete. They should expect to go and be really good and end up at the top of the conference. But I mean, there's not a whole lot going on right now on their roster. I'm sure that there'll be Penn State fans that'll show up in the comments and say, "Actually, did you know there's this receiver that looked pretty good in practice?" And I'm saying, "Okay, give me a proof of concept on a bunch of guys before you start telling me." And everyone's going to do that at this point in the offseason, right? Everyone's going to tell you why that receiver is actually going to step up, and we didn't even need that other guy, and blah 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 blah. And most of those guys are just lying to themselves because they know that they can't prove it right now, and that they're hoping, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. And right now, that's kind of where you have to be as a Penn State fan with your skill positions. But I think you're right that Drew Aller is getting a little bit too much hate for this. Like, the completion percentage wasn't that good, but he put the ball in the end zone a fair amount of times. He didn't turn the ball over. That's the big thing. And when you're a young quarterback, you have the tendency to want to force it. You want to try to get the ball into those tight windows because you could get away with it in high school, and you can't get away with it here anymore. And he made some good decisions. The low completion percentage tells me he threw the ball away or protected the football with some maybe off accuracy throws where it's if it's a go route, he's going to throw it a little bit more towards the outside just to make sure he doesn't leave it inside to get picked. And that tells me, yeah, he's got what it takes to do it mentally. Can he get a little bit more precise? Can he improve on the accuracy a little bit? And can he get the ball to some of those guys so they can make some plays this year? They're going to have to, because as we talked about a couple episodes ago, man, this is a real crossroads for Penn State. And I think this year could be massive for Drew Aller if he plays it the right way, or it could go ahead and crater a bunch of careers at Penn State if he doesn't play all that well.
It is a pivotal year, and they will be competing for a spot in the playoff. Obviously, they're going to do that every year in this expanded format. Schedule softens up just a little bit, not having to play both Ohio State and Michigan this year. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see if he can make that jump. All right. We've got 2 more spots in our top 5 for the Big Ten. I'm going to rattle off a few names here, and we can just kind of get the conversation flowing to see if we can come up with a number 4 and a number 5 behind Gabriel, Will Howard, and Drew Aller. So my considerations here, we've got transfer Will Rogers coming from Mississippi State to Washington. We've got Curtis Rourke, who was kind of a G5 darling for us last year. He decides to take another year of eligibility and test his acumen at the Power 5 level. He's coming from Ohio to Indiana. Ethan Garber's out at UCLA. Tyler Van Dyke, the former Miami quarterback, who I think if he plays to his ceiling, should definitely be top 5 at Wisconsin this year. Other guys you could throw in there. Dylan Raiola obviously hasn't taken a snap yet. I'm trying to tap the brakes a little bit on that hype train, but there's a lot of hype in Lincoln coming out of Dylan Raiola. Luke Altmaier, coming up from Ole Miss to Illinois. Lots of guys that could fill out these last 2 spots, but I'm wondering where you're leaning, Garrett.
Yeah, I really want to hype up a couple of guys real quick. Curtis Rourke is a very good quarterback, and there's a couple guys that are transferring out of the MAC that I think are going to end up being really, really good quarterbacks, and Curtis Rourke's certainly one of them. I think that he's going to do a lot of big things. It's, again, you're looking at, supporting cast with him and trying to wonder what ends up happening at Indiana. Like, what do they have at the skill positions? Can anybody step up to help him? But I think that, the skill jump he's going to handle just fine as long as they can put a good team around him. That's going to be fine. And I want to hype up Will Rogers a little bit. I know that there's been some, up and down and maybe not. And there's been some questions. But I want to go ahead and hype him up because when Mike Leach was his coach, he was a very good quarterback. And I know that obviously, nobody planned on that. And rest in peace, Mike Leach. And, we're still mourning that. And he's one of the best that's done it. But when he was at Mississippi State, look at 2021. I want to pull these numbers. I'm going back a couple of years.
I was gonna cite that exact same season, Garrett.
He had a 73.9% completion rating and threw for almost 5,000 yards, 4,739, 36 touchdowns, 9 interceptions.
Yeah,
he was their entire offense. Yeah, he didn't turn it over, and he never really has.
How many passes did he attempt in 2021?
He attempted 683 passes. He only threw 9 picks.
Yeah, that's insane.
That's pretty dang good. He had a 147 rating. So, look, he's a really, really, really good quarterback who I think that Mississippi State program got thrown into absolute turmoil because of what happened with Mike Leach. And again, like, rest in peace, Mike Leach. We're going to miss him. But it just kind of is when you have like a new coach trying to step up to keep the culture together. There's certain things you're going to prioritize, and they didn't bring in a top end offensive coach to come in and run that program. And they're going to have to think about what the future looks like and figure out rebuilding and everything going forward, obviously. But Will Rogers is taking a chance to go play in a good offense, and he's getting paired up with the guy who was just at Arizona and is going to probably light the world on fire a little bit up there. And so I think that Will Rogers deserves a lot more credit for who he is and what he's able to do. I think he's going to be really, really good up there at Washington. And I want to say it again, and I'm going to hype him a little bit. And we talked about this a little bit pre-show. Raiola has a chance at Nebraska to finish, I think, top 2, top 3 in this conference by the end of the year. Right now, he hasn't played a snap of college football. So, if we're going to count the spring game, he's played a little bit, but, spring games are spring games are spring games. But by the end of the season, I think, look, Dylan Raiola is talented enough that if he plays up to expectations, and let's say that he wins, 8 games with Nebraska, which would be a pretty great season. And, if he, can go above that, that'd be even bigger. I think a lot of people are looking at Dylan Raiola as one of the top quarterbacks in the country next year, not just the Big Ten. And he could finish top 3 in this conference by the time everything's said and done by the end. We're not going to put him on this list because he hasn't proven anything yet, and he hasn't really showed us anything yet, but he is very talented and might have the highest ceiling of anybody on this list.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, like you said, Dylan Raiola, Miller Moss is another guy that could be up there talent wise, but we just haven't seen enough on the college football field. But they could be top 5, top 3 by the end of the year. Absolutely. Really excited to see how this shakes out. We'll go with the vets right now. We'll put Curtis Rourke at number 4. I don't know how many games he's going to win at Indiana, but I don't think it's going to be his fault if and when they struggle. And Will Rogers, I'm really excited to see if he can bounce back this year in that offense up at Washington. It's going to be really fun to see.
Gracious him. How about that?